the U.S. offering flights out of Israel for Americans, and how a cost of living adjustment will affect paychecks for vets and military retirees. All of that and more today, October 13th, 2023. Good morning, Early Birds. I'm Jonathan Lehrfeld, and this is the Early Bird Brief, produced by Defense News and Military Times. First up, the White House announced that the U.S. government will begin operating evacuation flights to help Americans leave Israel. White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said the evacuation flights are expected to begin today. The announcement comes as Israel prepares to escalate retaliatory action against Hamas militants in the Gaza Strip. Conflict in Israel escalated over the weekend after Hamas militants launched an attack. Hamas said it launched its attack because of the suffering of Palestinians. According to people familiar with the planning, the U.S. government is arranging for at least 4 charter flights a day out of Israel. The announcement came as the White House confirmed that the death toll in the fighting now includes at least 27 Americans. The war has claimed at least 2,600 lives on both sides since Saturday. As of our recording Thursday, 14 U.S. citizens in Israel remain unaccounted for. The White House has said a handful of Americans are among the dozens of people that Hamas took hostage. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited Israel yesterday to meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Israeli citizens.
If you look at this in proportion to the size of Israel's population, this is the equivalent of 10 9/11s. That's how big and how devastating this attack has been.
Blinken said Americans would continue pushing regional countries for a safe passage in and out of Gaza. That could help the hundreds of American civilians trapped in the blockaded enclave during the fighting.
I'll go on to Jordan, where I'll meet with His Majesty King Abdullah and with Palestinian Authority President Abbas. And then over the coming days, we'll visit with leaders in Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Qatar. Across each of these engagements, we'll continue pressing countries to help prevent the conflict from spreading and to use our leverage with Hamas to immediately and unconditionally release the hostages.
The U.S. began moving military ships and aircraft to the region within hours of the attack. A second U.S. carrier strike group departs from Norfolk, Virginia today. Scores of aircraft are heading to U.S. military bases around the Middle East, and Special Operations Forces are now assisting Israel's military in planning and intelligence. But Kirby said in a White House briefing yesterday that there are no intentions to put American troops on the ground in Israel for combat operations. He said Israelis do not want foreign troops on their soil for that anyway. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is also scheduled to visit Israel. His visit will be a show of support. It will also be an effort to determine what additional military aid is needed for the war. Meanwhile, Germany has also offered military support to Israel. This all comes as supporters of Israel and Palestinians held demonstrations around the world. People are taking to the streets to express their views as the war escalates. Another important story: inflation rates are slowing down. That affects paychecks for veterans, military, and other federal government retirees. For more on cost of living adjustments, Federal Times reporter Molly Weisner joins the episode today. So, Molly, some big news came out of Social Security today for military veterans and federal government retirees. What happened?
Right. So big news came for retirees and military veterans on Thursday morning. The Social Security Administration announced that the cost of living adjustment for 2024 will be 3.2%. That is a big deal because that number is a lot lower than it was last year, and we'll talk in a minute about what exactly a COLA is. But for the purposes of, folks who are collecting Social Security, that means a retiree is going to see an average increase of a bit over $50 a month, at least according to a lot of the estimates we've seen so far.
And let's back up. What exactly is a COLA? Is it just for retired folks?
Yes, let's talk about a COLA because it's, again, one of those government acronyms, government jargon words that I think can get pretty hairy. So let's break it down here. So first of all, a cost of living adjustment, it is a common misconception that is some kind of a pay raise meant to keep up with inflation, meant to sort of keep up with the cost of living. And that's sort of true, except for the fact it's not for folks who are still working. It is only for people who are retired. So think of, retired government workers, military veterans. It is not for people who are still actively employed. So I will say, however, that if you are still working, but you're nearing retirement age, it is perhaps good to just track that this year's number is a lot lower than it was last year, because that can sort of give you an indication of how the market is trending, and you can factor that into your retirement planning. But of course, I would also say don't base your retirement decision off of a COLA. But again, sort of helps factor into the big picture. So a cost of living adjustment, again, it is just a boost that is calculated automatically each year, and it will factor into your Social Security benefits effective January 1st. And then, a year from now, we will look at it again. Now, one thing to know is that this affects a lot of people. Almost 8 million people collect Social Security benefits and are affected by this announcement. The other thing I would caution folks to remember is that even though it's called a cost of living boost, it is not intended to completely counteract the effects of lingering inflation. Certainly, goods and the cost of healthcare, especially for seniors and older folks, have increased over the last decade. And so if you're expecting this increase to essentially negate the effect of inflation biting into your benefits, you're probably going to be disappointed. The point of a COLA is to help your annuities keep up with inflation, but it's not, again, going to completely rectify any sort of negative impact that high prices have had. So an important thing for folks to know and to have reasonable expectations about. And this does apply to veterans as well. So in May, Congress approved legislation that would guarantee that veterans receive the same cost of living boost as Social Security recipients. So they are included in this. That decision does have to be made by Congress every year, but it's often a very non-controversial decision.
In other news, a new study reveals conflicting data on veterans. They're both more likely to own a home than other Americans and more likely to become homeless than their non-military peers. That's according to an analysis published this week from the Rand Epstein Family Veterans Policy Research Institute. The report said census data shows about 80% of veterans own a home, in comparison with 60% of non-veterans. Researchers say that's because of home loan benefits and higher employment rates. But veterans who are struggling with lingering health issues from their service may have trouble accessing those advantages. According to data from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, veterans make up about 5% of the American population, but they make up 7% of the population experiencing homelessness on any given night. According to the research, veterans who served after 2000 are almost twice as likely to be renters than older veterans. Female veterans also had lower incomes and lower home ownership rates than male veterans. RAND researchers said more education on financial resources could close the gap between successful and struggling veterans. Also on the radar for today, the Air Force charged a 2-star general with sexual assaults and other crimes this week. For more on this, senior Air Force Times reporter Rachel Cohen joins the episode today. So, who is Major General Philip Stewart? What was he charged with, and why is it such a big deal for the Air Force?
General Stewart was the commander of 19th Air Force, which is in charge of pilot training as well as, other types of aircrew training. He was fired earlier this year amid an investigation into misconduct. And so this week, the Air Force came out and said, we're charging him with sexual assault, dereliction of duty, extramarital sexual conduct, and conduct unbecoming of an officer. There's 6 counts altogether, 4 crimes. Dereliction of duty was for an incident in which he's accused of flying an aircraft within 12 hours of consuming alcohol. Unclear, what he flew or, if he was actively, drunk at the time. But yeah, it's a fairly unprecedented case, in recent years that have had a couple unprecedented cases.
So given that this is only the second time an Air Force general officer has been charged with a sexual crime, and the other incident was so recent, what do we think this says about the state of reporting these alleged crimes?
I think it means multiple things. I think it shows that people are getting more comfortable coming forward and talking about sexual assault. People are getting more comfortable with, not necessarily putting general officers on a pedestal. I mean, these are people that hold the highest ranks in the military, and they've been in for a really long time. They have lots of responsibility, and people typically have said we're not going to push it, whether that's because things get derailed in the process, earlier on by lower ranking commanders or things like that, or, people say they're going to get away with it, and so we're just not going to do this.
What are the next steps in moving forward with a court-martial for this case?
So on the 24th of October, he's going to go to a preliminary hearing known as a Article 32 hearing, and so that's where the Air Force is going to look at the evidence against him. They might bring in some people to testify, and then they'll decide whether to send the case to court-martial, and then that will get the ball rolling on that.
Thanks, Rachel. For more conversations like this one, please like and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. Also, be sure to tune in on Monday when we discuss with Rachel how the Air Force is shaking up its officer training school. And now, here are some other stories that we're hearing chirps about. U.S. Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey faces a new charge that he conspired to act as an agent of the Egyptian government. It's a remarkable accusation against a Democrat who had a powerful role in U.S. policy as head of the Senate's Foreign Relations Committee. A U.S. nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, the USS Ronald Reagan, arrived in South Korea yesterday. 2 Guatemalan migrants were killed and 4 other migrants were wounded in a shooting in northern Mexico near the U.S. border this week. The incident apparently involved Mexican army soldiers. And a Pentagon program is using parts from all over the world to piece together air defense weapons for Ukraine. The Pentagon calls it Frankensam. And on this day in history, in 1775, the Continental Congress authorized construction and administration of the first American naval force. Happy birthday, Navy! That's it for us this morning. To get more of the top stories and breaking news, go to defensenews.com/EBB to subscribe to the Early Bird Brief newsletter. Please give us a like, rating, and a comment wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on social media @defense_news and @military_times. The Early Bird Brief is hosted by me, Jonathan Lehrfeld, and produced by Simone Z. Perez. Today's episode features stories by the Associated Press, Leo Shane III, Molly Weisner, and Rachel Cohen. Our editor-in-chief is Mike Bruce. Have a great day.